Welcome, friends, to episode 3 of the Imago Leadership Podcast. I'm Lee Carter, and I'm honored to walk with you today through one of the most urgent and overlooked challenges facing leadership teams, the slow erosion of culture. Culture isn't just the vibe of your organization, it's the soil in which everything grows or fails to grow. It shapes how decisions are made, how people relate, how trust is built, and how the mission is carried forward. And when culture is sick, no strategy can save you. Today we're naming the hidden forces that sabotage culture from within. I call them the Big 10 culture killers. These are the patterns I've seen play out in nonprofits, churches, global teams. They're subtle, persistent, and devastating. But here's the good news. Once you name them, you can confront them. And once you confront them, you can begin to cultivate something far more life-giving. Before we name the killers, let's revisit the foundation we've been talking about in the last few episodes. Leadership in its healthiest form isn't about control. It's about the cultivation of strong relational dynamics in the team, which allows the kind of transformative mission to occur in an increasingly changing world. Leadership is not about being the hero, it's about hosting the transformation. I often say that leadership is a social dynamic. It's not a solo act. It's what happens in the space between people. It's the energy, the exchange, the discernment that emerges when a group commits to journeying together on a common mission. That's what I call communitas. It's a sacred bond forged in liminal spaces. Little is achieved by one leader alone. To have the sort of exponential impact that we all dream about, you need a team that makes individual contributions more than the sum of their parts. Only a team can do that. When leaders dialogue, make sense of their changing environments, discuss issues and problems, collaborate, and even when they face conflicts, they unlock the true creative magic of leadership. They create a vibrant, creative human enterprise that broadens the reach of their shared mission. Think of Moses in the wilderness. He wasn't just leading people out of Egypt, he was hosting a transformation. He was creating space for people to become a people. That's the kind of leadership we need today. Not positional authority, but relational presence. Not command and control, but discernment. Now, if we're made in the image of God, our leadership must reflect the relational, communal nature of the Trinity. That's why I talk about Jesus communities, teams and organizations that center their life together on the character and the person of Christ. In a Jesus community, leadership is shaped by humility, justice, and mercy. It's not about climbing ladders, but it's about washing feet, like Jesus did with his disciples in John 13. It's about witness, reflecting who this God is to the watching world. And it's not about preserving power, it's about pouring it out, sharing that resource so that others can flourish. When teams embrace this posture, something remarkable happens. They stop competing and they start discerning. They stop performing and they start belonging to each other. They become a community of participation, a people who reflect the generosity of their patron king. So what gets in the way? What are the forces that fracture this kind of culture? That's where the Big 10 culture killers come in. And I've been blogging on these top 10 culture killers. I invite you to check out those blogs on my website, imagoleadership.org. These are the patterns that sabotage direction and alignment and commitment, the 3 pillars of collaborative leadership. They're not always loud, sometimes they whisper, but their impact is profound. Let's walk through each one of them, not just to name them, but to understand how they operate and how we can begin to resist them. The first culture killer is the soundproof room. This is the death of listening. It's when leaders hear words, but they miss meaning. When communication becomes transactional and not transformational. In soundproof rooms, people speak, but they're not heard, and they share, but they aren't seen. I've worked with teams where meetings felt like performances. Everyone said the right things, but no one felt safe enough to say the real things. It was just a discussion of, well, here's what I'm doing, and no more real life-giving dialogue about those things that helped us make sense of our mission together. That's the soundproof room, and it kills trust. The antidote? Deep listening. Not just active listening, but appreciative inquiry, asking questions that invite story, not just status. You're trying to understand where others are coming from. You're trying to get people to share their story of how they're impacted by organizational decisions, what they're facing, and all that. That's appreciative inquiry, appreciating the fact that others have gifts and perspectives that you need. Appreciating that God is already at work in the context before you even came to this conversation. Create space for silence. Let people finish their sentences, and most of all, listen to understand, not respond. Secondly, stories that burn. We all carry internal narratives, scripts about who we are, who others are, and what's possible. When those stories are shaped by fear, shame, or control, they burn bridges. They create reactive behaviors that sabotage collaboration, and they hurt people made in God's image. That is a violation we need to take more seriously in our day and age. Imagine a leader who believes she has to prove her worth in every meeting. You probably all have a picture of a real person you know in your minds when I say that. Their internal story is, I'm only valuable if I'm the smartest person in the room. That kind of story leads to defensiveness, micromanagement, and burnout. To heal these stories, we need communal reflection. Invite your team to name the narratives they carry. What assumptions are driving their behavior? What fears are shaping their decisions? When stories are surfaced, they can be reauthored. Third is conflict without a compass. Conflict is inevitable, but without a shared compass, such as cleared norms, theological grounding, and fair processes, it becomes destructive. And truthfully, this happens more often than we'd like to think. I believe that our theology of reconciliation is the right starting point. If you have a myopic and worldly idea of reconciliation, your practices will only reflect that. We need godly theology of reconciliation to ground us and direct us in our conflict resolution practices. Some teams avoid conflict entirely, others weaponize it. Both approaches fracture trust. Healthy teams normalize conflict. They see it as a doorway to deeper understanding. They don't provoke fear. They invite dialogue and understanding. They practice confession, forgiveness, and repair. They name harm and pursue healing, and they do it together. One practice I recommend is to create a conflict covenant. This is a shared agreement about how your team will engage hard conversations. Include commitments to curiosity, courage, and care for one another. Let it be a living document that shapes your culture. Fourth is the stunted mirror. When leaders stop growing, teams stop trusting. A stunted mirror reflects only the past. It can't see the future. I've seen organizations plateau because their leaders refuse to evolve. They clung to old models. They resisted feedback. They feared vulnerability. Oftentimes, they just trusted what they brought to the table and they didn't see any need to improve. The result? Resentment, stagnation, turnover. Growth must be modeled. Leaders should be the most curious people in the room. They should invite coaching, pursue learning, and share their own journey of transformation. Ask yourself, what's the last thing you learned that changed your leadership? If you can't answer, it's time to re-engage the mirror. Fifth is lone wolves in shared fields. Empowerment is beautiful, but without community, it becomes isolation. Lone wolves operate without accountability. They make decisions in silos. They resist collaboration. They sideline others. And they often burn out or they burn others. Healthy empowerment is communal. It's rooted in shared discernment, mutual submission, and relational trust. It's not do whatever you want. It's bring your gifts to the table and let's steward them together. One metaphor I love, think of your team as a jazz ensemble. Each player has freedom, but they're listening to one another. They're responding to one another. They're improvising within a shared rhythm. That's empowered community. Sixth is the compliance cage. HR should be a partner in mission. It's that simple. But when policies prioritize liability and organizational protection over people, they become cages. Unfortunately, HR is often feared more than they're trusted. When policies were weaponized and not contextualized, where people felt like numbers, not neighbors, or even friends on mission together. To break the cage, HR must be realigned. Policies should protect dignity, not mitigate risk. Processes should be transparent, restorative, and mission aligned, and they need to be anchored in mission. HR leaders should be culture stewards, not compliance enforcers. They need to be business partners in the process of moving toward your mission together. Ask your team, does our HR reflect our values? If not, it's time to redesign. 7 is the side door strategy. This is the art of the end run, making decisions outside the circle, bypassing authority and eroding trust. Side doors often emerge when people feel unheard. They seek shortcuts because the main path feels blocked. To close the side door, open the front door wider. Create clear channels for input, invite dissent, respond to feedback, and most of all, honor the structures you've built. If someone bypasses you, don't just correct them, ask why. What need wasn't I meeting? What trust was broken? That's where healing begins. Don't be defensive, but listen and be willing to change, be willing to grow. If you are the person that the bypasser is going to, you need to make empowerment of your direct reports a priority. Don't try to solve the issue for them or in place of them, but reinforce their agency and responsibility to work through the problem with this employee and offer support in that process. You hired them to do the job that they have. You need to empower their agency to do that, especially in this conflict. 8 is feeding the cobra. Toxic behavior thrives when it's rewarded, when bullies are promoted, when manipulators are tolerated, and when harm is ignored. Feeding the cobra means letting fear dictate decisions. It means avoiding hard conversations. It means sacrificing culture for convenience. What's the antidote? Courageous boundaries. Equip your team to name the harm. Create restorative processes. And most of all, stop rescuing people from the consequences of their behavior. Remember, grace isn't the absence of boundaries, it's the presence of truth held with love. 9 is foggy norms and frayed trust. Unclear expectations create confusion. When professionalism is preached but never defined, people flounder. I've seen healthy teams implode because no one knew what healthy behavior meant. Everyone had their own standard, and when conflict arose, there was no shared reference point. To clear the fog, name your norms, define what trust looks like, create a culture covenant that outlines your commitments to one another, make it visible, revisitable, and communal. Norms aren't rules, they're relational agreements. They're the scaffolding of trust. And finally, number 10 is the wisdom gap. Idealism is also beautiful, but without counsel, it becomes dangerous. Leaders who dream without grounding often lead teams into chaos. They chase a vision without strategy. They make decisions without discernment, and they leave a trail of confusion behind them. Most missional leaders have strong ideals, and that's a good thing. We all use our ideals to help us navigate our world. However, the problem on teams occurs when the leader's ideals become more sacred and unquestionable to them than the wisdom of others' counsel. You are there to encourage mutual discernment, not to get others to think the same way you do. Submit your ideals to the scrutiny of the team you've gathered to be on mission with you. To close the gap, seek wisdom. Surround yourself with truth tellers. Invite critique. Ground your vision in reality. And most of all, stay teachable. Why do these culture killers matter? Each of these 10 patterns undermines the very conditions that allow healthy leadership to flourish. They sabotage direction, alignment, and commitment, the 3 pillars of collaborative leadership identified by the Center for Creative Leadership. Let's revisit those briefly. Direction is a shared understanding of where we're going. It's not just a strategic plan, it's a communal sense of purpose. It's arrived at through communal processes of discernment. Alignment is the coordination of effort. It's how people, resources, and priorities move in sync toward that shared direction. And commitment is the mutual investment in the mission and in one another. It's the glue that holds the team together when things get hard. We all understand, we all have experienced circumstances where you're on a team, but someone has divided commitments, and how frustrating that can be when you're trying to get stuff done together. When all 3 are present, leadership happens, not because someone exerted power, but because the team moved together. That's the future of missional leadership, and that is the heartbeat of Jesus communities. But when culture killers are present, these pillars collapse. Direction becomes confused, alignment fractures, and commitment erodes, and the team begins to drift. So let's talk about accountability. Too often, we hold leaders accountable for outcomes without equipping them to create the environments that produce those outcomes. We expect excellence, but we ignore the relational dynamics that makes excellence possible. I often say that we think so much about leadership in terms of individual leaders and the skills and personalities and strengths that they bring to the table. And that's all good. We need to develop our individual strengths and leadership abilities and capacities. But the fact is that if you put a person who comes with all of the best leadership pedigree in the world into an environment of collaboration, but the environment is toxic, their leadership is going to fail. So leadership really is a social dynamic primarily before it's an individual competence. So accountability must shift. It's not just about task completion, it's increasingly important about cultivating culture. Leaders should be held responsible for whether they're fostering environments where communitas can thrive. Are they creating space for direction, alignment, and commitment? Are they creating space for mutual discernment? Are they modeling growth, humility, and shared discernment? If not, we're not just missing the mark, we're misdefining leadership altogether. We've all known and have been personally involved in organizations that evaluate their leaders solely on metrics such as revenue or reach or retention. But when you ask what's the culture like under their leadership, the room goes quiet. That silence speaks volumes. Metrics matter, of course, but they're not the whole story. Culture is the story behind the story. Let me say something that might challenge conventional wisdom. The leader's job is not to define reality. I've heard that said many times. It's not to define reality. It's to create the conditions where reality can be defined together. Peter Senge, in his work, The Fifth Discipline, which explores organizational systems and their effect on team performance, says this: people in the business world love heroes. We lavish praise and promotion on those who achieve visible results. But if something goes wrong, we feel intuitively that somebody must have screwed up. We've inherited a hero-centric model of leadership. We celebrate the lone visionary, the charismatic savior, the one who gets it done. But that model is crumbling. The complexity of today's world demands communal wisdom, not individual brilliance. The leader's role is to cultivate a culture where the team becomes the hero, where discernment is shared, where reality is defined in dialogue and not dictated from above. I like to use the metaphor of a gardener. A gardener doesn't force growth. He can't. He or she can't. All they can do is plant the seeds and create the environment where the growth can happen. They tend the soil, they monitor the climate, they prune what's unhealthy, they protect what's emerging. That's leadership. It's slow, it's patient, and deeply relational. Let me share a story that illustrates this shift. In the early 1900s, two American explorers, Frederick Cook and Robert Peary, raced to be the first to reach the North Pole. And each claimed victory, each claimed that they had done it, and each argued that the other did not. Each presented journals and charts. They had their evidence, but to this day, no one can definitely prove who arrived first. And remember, in the early 1900s, we didn't have the kind of sophisticated GPS and communication systems that we have now. We depended a lot on word of mouth, on people's testimony, and on their navigation chart. So what's the point? I believe that the real legacy isn't who got there first. We all love to make our marks. We all love to say, I was the first to do this or that. I was the one that created the impact. But that's not the vision of leadership for the future. The legacy of these two men is what their teams learned along the way, the insights they brought back, the courage they modeled, the ripple effects their journeys had on future exploration. They all came back with a lot of learning that they shared with the scientific community, which has had transformative, exponential impact in the way we understand geography and science even today. It doesn't matter who got that first. What matters is how they contributed to a communal way of thinking about the world. It's not about staking a claim, it's about shaping a path. It's about learning together, growing together, and contributing something that lasts beyond any one person's name. One final reflection. We must stop scapegoating individuals for systemic failures. Yes, leaders should be held accountable. However, accountable must be grounded in clear expectations, well-documented processes and procedures, and a shared understanding. If your organizational philosophy is vague or abstract, or if your HR policies are ambiguous, if your norms are undefined, then holding someone accountable becomes arbitrary, and frankly, it's just unjust. You're making them responsible for things that they weren't clear about in the first place. It becomes personal. It basically is saying, I disagree with the way you handled that, and so I've become the standard. And quite frankly, that is just arrogance. It's not just unfair, it's toxic. You shouldn't be the standard. You need to create objectivity in your organizational processes and procedures so the organization can hold people accountable. Leaders operate within systems, and if those systems are broken, no amount of individual brilliance can fix them. We must build systems that support communal leadership, not just individual performance. This is especially true in faith-based and nonprofit spaces where mission can be used to excuse dysfunction. We're all doing good work becomes a shield against critique. I've been in situations in which I was advised to be professional or to take a humble approach. That sounds great, but what does that actually mean in practice? Two different people can and will define those terms very differently. Make sure your organizational systems support clear and just accountability. Be explicit in what you expect of people. Mission without healthy systems is a recipe for burnout and betrayal. So what do we do? How do we begin to repair culture when we've named the killers? Here are 5 practical steps that I think can help bear fruit across diverse teams. First, name what's real. Start with honest reflection. Invite your team to name what's working and what's not, and use language that's clear, compassionate, and courageous. Avoid euphemisms and speak truth in love. Take a pulse on your culture with tools such as the Best Christian Workplaces survey or even more informal and homegrown devices. Survey team members to rate their experience of trust, clarity, collaboration, and growth. The results often reveal patterns that leaders can't see from their vantage point. Secondly, create shared language. Culture shifts when people have shared words for shared experiences. Develop a glossary of key terms like communitas, discernment, repair, alignment. Use them consistently. Teach them. Embed them in your onboarding, your meetings, your rituals. Language does shape reality. When teams speak the same language, they begin to see the same landscape. You begin to build direction, alignment, and commitment. Number 3, build relational infrastructure. Culture isn't just built in strategy sessions, it's built in relationships. Create rhythms for connection, weekly check-ins, monthly reflection circles, quarterly retreats. These aren't just luxuries, they're necessities. I've seen teams transform simply by committing to 1 hour a week of non-tasked conversation. They talk about values, stories, and shared hopes, and over time, trust deepens. I've seen where when people start to build authentic relationships with each other, the walls drop and they trust each other, and they're now able to have the kind of conversations that they couldn't have before. Number 4, clarify norms and expectations. Don't assume people know what healthy behavior, quote unquote, looks like. Define it, document it, revisit it often. Create a culture covenant, a living document that outlines your team's commitments to one another. Include things like how we handle conflict, how we give feedback and receive feedback, how we honor boundaries, how we celebrate wins. Make it visible, make it communal, and make it revisitable. Number 5, equip for repair. Culture breaks, that's inevitable. What matters is how you respond. Equip your team with tools for repair. Teach them how to name harm, seek forgiveness, rebuild trust. Normalize the language of rupture and restoration. One possible practice you could try is a circle of repair. When conflict arises, the team gathers in a circle. Each person shares what they've experienced, what they need, and what they're willing to offer. It's structured, it's sacred, and it's deeply healing. So here's my invitation to you. Take a hard look at your team's culture. Are these killers lurking beneath the surface? Are you cultivating communitas or just managing tasks? Are you leading from a posture of hospitality or from a place of fear? Leadership is not about perfection. It's about presence and creating space for transformation. You are tending the soil even when the harvest feels far away. In our next episode, we'll go deeper into the roots of these culture killers and explore how theology, psychology, organizational design can help us build cultures of trust, clarity, and shared mission. I'd love to hear your reflections and reactions to this episode. Please share them in the comments so that others may benefit from your wisdom. And also, if you have a moment, please give this podcast a 5-star rating so that others may find it and join in the conversation. It really does help people find this podcast. Until then, may you lead with courage, listen with compassion, and cultivate the kind of culture that reflects the image of God. Thanks for joining me.